In the final, collapsing months of the Second World War, as flames consumed the Japanese Empire from the skies and seas, one massive shadow still lingered, a remnant of old naval doctrines and dreams of dominance across the Pacific. This shadow had a name that echoed with mythic ambition: Yamato. She was the largest battleship ever built, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, a floating fortress of armor and thunder meant to dominate oceans by fear alone. But by the spring of 1945, fear was no longer enough. America's fast carriers, long-range aircraft, and overwhelming industrial power had rewritten the rules of naval war. Battleships, once kings of the sea, were now relics, giants doomed to die under skies they could not control. And so, on April 7, 1945, in a last desperate gesture of defiance, Japan sent Yamato on a mission so hopeless that many officers called it a floating funeral procession. The mission had a name: Operation Tengo. It was the final tragic chapter of Japan's battleship era. To understand the weight of that moment, one must return to 1941, when Yamato first slid into the Pacific as the largest warship the world had ever seen. Conceived in secrecy at the Kure Naval Arsenal, she was designed to outmatch any American battleship. Her massive 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval artillery ever mounted on a warship, could hurl shell after shell farther and harder than anything on Earth. Her armor was thick enough to absorb what no other ship could withstand. Her crew, numbering nearly 3,000, believed they served aboard a symbol of Japan's divine destiny. But destiny is a fragile thing. By 1942, America's aircraft carriers proved themselves the true arbiters of naval power. At Midway, 4 Japanese carriers were lost in a single day. The empire never recovered. Battleships like Yamato became floating fortresses with nowhere to go, too powerful to abandon, too outdated to employ.
Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had once championed the power of carriers, understood Japan's doom long before most. "I shall run wild for 6 months," he warned before Pearl Harbor. "After that, I have no confidence." And his prophecy held true. By late 1944, the Japanese Navy was shattered. In October of that year, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Yamato and her sister ship, Musashi, fired their massive guns in combat for the first and only time. Musashi, the equally enormous twin, was swarmed by hundreds of American carrier aircraft and hammered into the sea. She sank slowly, defiantly, the weight of her armor dragging her into darkness. Yamato survived, damaged, exhausted, but still afloat. Yet she returned to port with a grim new understanding. Aircraft now ruled the ocean. By early 1945, with American forces closing in on Okinawa, Japan's military leadership debated their final measures. The empire was starving, cities lay in ruins, and fuel supplies were nearly drained to fumes. But there remained an unwavering belief among the hardline admirals and generals that a single, dramatic sacrifice might inspire the homeland and stall the American advance. The last battleship had to fight. Admiral Seiichi Ito, commander of the Yamato Task Force, knew the truth. Japan could no longer sustain meaningful naval operations. Fuel was so scarce that the fleet had been largely immobilized for months. Yet the order came from above, from the desperate leadership in Tokyo, determined to stage one final act of honor, even if it meant annihilation. Yamato was to sail to Okinawa with a small escort force, beach herself on the shore, and become an unsinkable gun platform, firing her massive cannons at American forces until destroyed. Ito objected. He argued the mission was suicidal, a waste of lives. But political pressure crushed military logic. Admiral Toyota, chief of the Naval General Staff, insisted Japan must demonstrate its resolve. "If we do not fight, we cannot show the nation how to die." Those words sealed the fate of thousands. And so, reluctantly, Ito accepted the order, and the men of Yamato prepared for a mission from which they knew they would not return. On April 6, 1945, the giant battleship prepared to sail from Tokuyama. She was stripped for speed, ammunition reduced, fuel tanks filled with just enough for a one-way trip. Aboard were over 3,000 sailors, many barely trained, but all aware of the whispered truth. This was a kamikaze mission for a ship. Captain Kosaku Ariga, Yamato's commanding officer, addressed his men. Though accounts vary, survivors recall a somber, almost whispering tone. "We will die honorably. I shall lead you. There can be no turning back." The crew wrote farewell letters, many of which would never be delivered. Some drank sake quietly below deck. Others stood in silence along the rails, watching the shoreline fade as Yamato began her final voyage. Escorting her were the light cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers, thin protection against the overwhelming American fleet lying in wait beyond the horizon.
American intelligence was far from blind. Codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications, and U.S. Navy patrol submarines detected the movement. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, immediately grasped the meaning. Japan had sent its last battleship on suicide duty. But instead of engaging with surface ships, the Americans prepared something deadlier. Task Force 58, under Admiral Mark Mitcher, launched wave after wave of carrier aircraft, bombers, torpedo bombers, fighters. Yamato would never get close enough to fire a single shell at Okinawa. On the morning of April 7th, as the Japanese task force pushed south through choppy seas, rain clouds gathered overhead. The horizon was gray, the wind stiff, and the ship's lookout crews strained their eyes, knowing the first American aircraft could appear from any direction. At 8:23 a.m., destroyer Isokaze reported radar contacts to the north. The Japanese formation tightened into an anti-aircraft defense circle, but there was no escaping what came next. Far above, more than 300 American aircraft from the carriers Hornet, Bennington, Belleau Wood, San Jacinto, and others swept into formation. Among them were the deadly Helldiver dive bombers, Avenger torpedo bombers, and the agile Hellcat fighters. They were led by experienced airmen who had already shattered Japan's Navy in the Philippines months earlier. Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare had once pioneered night fighter tactics against Japan. Others, like Air Group Commander Herbert Houck, had led attacks at Leyte Gulf. These pilots knew the significance of their target, the last Titan of the Imperial Navy. At 10:14 a.m., the sky above Yamato roared. Lookouts shouted the words every Japanese sailor feared. "Raiders! Raiders approaching!" Sea spray whipped across the deck as anti-aircraft gunners took their positions. The massive battleship surged forward at full speed, 27 knots, struggling to maneuver as the first formations of American aircraft descended like a storm. The attack came in coordinated waves. Dive bombers plunged from above, releasing explosive payloads aimed at the decks and superstructure. Torpedo bombers swept low along the sea, targeting the vulnerable hull below the waterline. Fighters strafed gunners and command positions. The Japanese fired back with desperation. Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft guns rattled violently, tracers streaking across the sky. But the Americans were too many, too skilled, and too relentless. The first torpedo hit Yamato's port side, shuddering through her steel frame. Then another, and another. The ship listed sharply,
but engineers fought back, counter-flooding compartments to stabilize her. Admiral Ito remained calm on the bridge, watching explosions erupt across the deck. Captain Eriga, jacket removed and sleeves rolled, barked orders with unwavering clarity. A bomb struck near the forward gun turret, killing dozens instantly. Flames erupted from the deck, licking at ammunition stores dangerously close. The second wave of American aircraft arrived before the fires were even contained. A torpedo slammed into her starboard side, followed by two more. The ship groaned like a living beast struck in the heart. Compartments flooded rapidly. Men drowned below deck as watertight hatches sealed, trapping them to prevent further flooding. The list grew worse. Damage control crews worked with astonishing bravery, but the strikes were precise and overwhelming. Meanwhile, Yahagi, the light cruiser, was targeted heavily. Already struggling with engine trouble before the battle, she became a prime target and was soon battered by torpedoes, exploding and sinking with massive loss of life. Japanese destroyers attempted smokescreens, evasive maneuvers, even suicidal charges at incoming aircraft, but nothing stopped the American assault. By 12 p.m., Yamato was mortally wounded. More than 10 torpedoes and multiple bombs had torn open her hull. Fires raged out of control. Ammunition stores cooked off and violent secondary explosions. The list increased past 20 degrees. Water flooded engineering compartments. The ship's massive turbines slowed and then died. Power flickered. Radio communications failed. Captain Eriga ordered the crew to abandon ship, but many refused. Some clung to duty, others could not escape compartments already sealed. Eyewitnesses recalled officers and sailors standing at attention on the tilting deck, saluting the rising sun flag fluttering violently in the smoke-filled wind. At 2:23 p.m., as the ship rolled past 120 degrees, the unimaginable happened. The forward magazine, where thousands of pounds of ammunition were stored, detonated. The explosion was apocalyptic. A column of fire shot thousands of feet into the sky, a mushroom cloud visible from miles away. The shock wave tore the ship apart. Metal fragments rained across the ocean. The hull cracked and folded, and the greatest battleship ever built disappeared beneath the waves. Of the more than 3,000 men aboard, only about 280 survived. Admiral Ito chose to go down with his ship, standing resolute on the bridge. Captain Eriga was last seen clinging to the rail, refusing rescue, determined to share the fate of his crew. Many sailors who leapt into the water were burned horribly by the oil-slick flames, or killed when the final explosion sucked the ocean downward in a violent vortex. When the sea finally calmed, all that remained were scattered debris, drifting bodies, and a dark stain spreading across the waves.
The era of the battleship, an era of steel giants and thunderous guns, ended in that moment. The sinking of Yamato was more than the destruction of a ship. It marked the symbolic collapse of Imperial Japan's naval dreams. It proved beyond all doubt that air power, not armor, not guns, was the future of war at sea. And it reflected the tragedy of a nation led into ruin by leaders unable to accept defeat. Operation Tengo accomplished nothing militarily. Okinawa would fall weeks later. Japan would surrender in August. And the corpse of Yamato, once the pride of a mighty navy, still rests today on the seabed, cracked open, silent, a monument to the end of the battleship age. Yet the human stories remain. Survivors carried memories that haunted them for decades, the screams of trapped shipmates, the sudden darkness of capsizing steel, the fireball that consumed friends and officers they respected deeply. American pilots, too, spoke of mixed emotions, pride in their success, but awe and sorrow at witnessing the death of so many. Lieutenant Commander Harry J. Brubaker,
who participated in the attack, described the sight of the final explosion as something magnificent and terrible, like watching a mountain blow itself apart. History often records victories and defeats in cold, detached numbers, sorties flown, tonnage sunk, casualties counted. But the sinking of Yamato is remembered differently. It is remembered as a tragedy of war, a symbol of futile sacrifice, and a reminder that even the mightiest steel leviathans are powerless against the tides of change. In the decades since, divers and researchers have visited the wreck, capturing haunting images of the shattered hull. The massive turrets lie twisted in the sand. The bridge is crushed under debris. The once proud armor belt is torn open like paper. Nature has reclaimed the giant. Marine life swims around the ruins where thousands perished. A somber memorial stands in Kure today, honoring the men who served aboard her, young men who followed orders, who believed in duty, who died in a war they could not win. And so ends the story of the Yamato, the last titan of a vanished age. Her destruction was inevitable, but her legacy endures, an echo of a time when nations built giants to rule the seas, before the sky became the true battlefield. Her final mission, tragic and doomed, stands as one of the most dramatic and heartbreaking moments in naval history, a final symbol of the collapse of Imperial Japan and the end of the battleship era forever.